Oh, it's so good to see a full house here. Everyone is super excited about learning how to organize your funders for Black possibilities. So great to have you. We are going to be together for a power hour. And let me first introduce myself and my wonderful co panelists here, and then I'll let you know what we're about to get into. So, welcome everybody. My name is Lisa Owens. I'm the executive director of the Hyams Foundation. Hyams is a local movement funder here in Boston. We fund racial justice and economic justice movements who are working for systemic transformative change. And we proudly partner with UGMA and lots of groups in the Boston and Massachusetts area. And we're just so happy. I am so happy to be here with all of us. So thank you for allowing me to be here. And I'm going to allow my co-panelists to introduce themselves. Nwamaka.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nwamaka Agbo, based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. I use the pronoun she and her. And I am the CEO of the Kataly Foundation and the managing director of our Restorative Economies Fund.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy Steger. I'm president and CEO of the Eastern Bank Foundation, different kind of foundation. We're focused on economic inclusion and economic mobility right here in Boston. How many people are here from Boston? All right.
All right.
Boston's in the house.
Awesome. All right. So we're so excited to be in conversation with all of you. So originally, the title of this workshop was Demystifying Philanthropy, and really, what we want to do is be in conversation together and with all of you to talk about what are the levers that exist for you, for social movement groups to be able to organize funders to do the social change work that you spend your days and nights sweating and toiling and playing and celebrating, right? We are part of a growing wave, I would say, of folks who are progressive in politics and who are leading foundations. And so you should see us as your allies as you are working towards social change. We each represent different kinds of foundations, and we each employ different strategies that, taken as a whole, we hope will give you some ideas as you're thinking about how to organize the funders that you're in relationship with. And so we are going to have a conversation about power, about what are the tools that we have at our disposal to be able to redistribute wealth back into our communities. And as a result of that, what are movements, communities able to do having leveraged those investments? So that's what we're about to get into. A couple of words, of notes, just about two concepts. So we are going to be talking, and hopefully by the time you leave here, you will, if you didn't already realize, that there are other ways to engage funders other than sitting down and writing a grant for $25,000 and hitting send at 11:59 when it's due at midnight. It doesn't have to be that way. There are other ways to engage funders. There are other sources of capital that you should know about so that you can organize us. So that's one. Generally, we're talking about money that either doesn't have to be paid back, right? So grants, general operating, project grants, et cetera, we all know about that. But also, there are many ways. So, a lot of us organize funders to pool our funding, to do capacity building or infrastructure projects or movement convening or technical assistance of some kind. Will you? And then so we'll talk about very specific ways. And then also there's capital that does have to be paid back, but often below market or sometimes 0% interest loans, right? So be thinking about the different types of capital that we're going to be talking about. And then lastly, we are talking about working on behalf of social justice movements and groups and organizations and leaders. And that's an umbrella term that encompasses lots of different kinds of formally and informally organized groups. So there are solidarity economy projects like UGMA, for example, or the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, for example. But there are also community organizing groups. There are service providers. There are there are small businesses that have a social mission. There are lots of different groups that we're using when we use this umbrella term, social justice groups. Okay, so with those caveats out of the way, I'm excited to kind of dive into this question, our first questions or series of questions. And what's going to happen is I'm going to ask Nwamaka first, and then I'm going to ask Nancy to respond to the same question, and then I will. So you all have you have different perspectives, different kinds of foundation examples, and then for a few minutes we're just going to be in dialogue with each other. And then around 6:40, 6:45-ish, we will open it up and be in dialogue together. So that's what we're about to do. Okay. So I've asked each of my amazing co-panelists to reflect on a couple of questions. So take some or all of these questions. It's totally up to you. Okay. So how do you define power? That's the first question. And what are the tools that you use that are at your disposal to work in service with our social movement groups? And what's an example of what they're able to do as a result of these investments that you're making, these tools that you're using? So big questions, take all or none.
Wow, Lisa, wow. Okay. And I realized, sorry, when you asked me to introduce myself, I gave you some titles, but you're all like, what does that even mean? So the Kataly Foundation, we are a private family foundation. And we were founded with the mission to spend out all of our assets within 10 to 15 years. So we do that through 3 program areas. We have our Mindfulness and Healing Justice program area. We have our Environmental Justice Resourcing Collective. And then we have our Restorative Economies Fund, which is an integrated capital fund. And our mission is to focus in on redistributing our resources to build the political, economic, and cultural power of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and all communities of color. So to your question about power, right? We think about power, and I would be dishonest if I didn't say that this is also informed by my own organizing background. Power is the ability to have true choice in your life, right? And then being able to have access to the resources to implement those choices. And political power then means you are able to defend those choices in the court of law and in the court of public opinion, right? And so when we think about the Guaranteed Basic Income video that we had just watched, right? So much of what we heard was that the participants in the program wanted to have access to the economic resources, right? The economic power to then make choices, right? What are their values? What are their norms? What do they want their life to look and feel like? The cultural power that they want to have to be able to implement it. And then political power speaking to what is the role of the state to defend our rights, right? To right the wrongs that have happened. And so when we think about the projects that we support throughout the entire foundation, not just with the Restorative Economies Fund team, is yes, it's about who is being served, how are decisions being made, and how are those decisions being implemented, but then how are you in just and right relationship with the social movements that are on the front lines of contesting for power, right? And making it possible for us to win terrain that then allows us to expand our understanding of what rights are. I'm trying to remember your second question. There was a lot. Can we skip? Can we?
So how? What? So
the tools.
The tools.
The tools. Sorry, y'all. So there's a few tools and a few experiments that we're running inside of the foundation. I think one of the first tools that we'll lift up is, what does it actually mean to be a spend out foundation? What does it actually mean to think about how are you redistributing your resources to actually build wealth in other communities? And so for the investments that we make at the Restorative Economies Fund team, when we are looking at investing in community wealth building projects, we really want to understand, how is this project designed to be financially sustainable, not so that the returns come back to the foundation, right? But so that they're able to continue to circulate and regenerate out into community. And so being able to support communities and projects and thinking about what is the ongoing circulation of assets and how do we share it. And inside of that, also wanting to lift up how, by the ways that we move the resources and invest in certain projects, how are we investing in ways that help us to transition out of an extractive economic system and into one that's more regenerative and sustainable? So that's kind of the sweet spot that we look for in the projects that we support. And we also understand that their projects will need time. They will need runway, if we will, in order to be able to design and implement their mission. So in addition to providing long-term patient capital, non-extractive integrated capital, and I don't know if we all use in the same terms. Do we need to define and unpack? Okay, so integrated capital speaks to our ability to move capital across the spectrum to communities, right? We know that communities across the different stages of their businesses and as they're growing will need different forms of capital. So sometimes a project will need grant dollars, and sometimes they may also need investments. And so when we look to resource a project, we really want to understand, well, what is the planning grant that you might need? What is the multi-year general operating support that you might need? You'll probably also need a one-time capital contribution, and then you'll likely need a long-term patient capital loan, a 10-year term, 0 to 2%, no collateral, and deep support with the community. And so within the Restorative Economies Fund team, we play with those different capital tools. And I would say throughout the foundation, we are playing with or experimenting with, what does it look like to support people who come from a lived and movement background to actually be a part of a private family foundation, to be a part of the hard and challenging conversations and decisions around how you move resources. That is how we actually develop our own capacity to govern, right? That is how we actually develop our ability to be deeply accountable to our communities. And so those are some of the tools that we look at on the grant making side or the programmatic side. And then I would say that, as we are moving towards spend out, there is a question, or like the math problem, of how do we hold and steward our assets while we're deploying them over an annual basis out to community. And so you can't just go to a bank and park $450 million, right? You have to really figure out, how do you invest it? And given what we've talked about today with Wall Street, if you want to invest it alongside your values, it's not just ESG screening in, screening out. You have to be very detailed and targeted. So being able to work closely with our team, our chief finance officer and our chief investment officer, to really think through, how do we actually support CDFIs, MDIs, think about municipal bonds, all the other different assets that allow us to be strategic and specific in the communities that we want to invest in, making sure that they have access to the capital that we need. Because we're not existing into perpetuity, it gives us the flexibility to really think about those long-term investments and the management of our assets, as opposed to just kind of parking them on Wall Street, because we're really centering our own perpetuity as a foundation, which, for what? Is that, did I do good? That's there was perfect. One more question.
So the other, I want you to hold that, because I'm going to ask you that question. That was amazing. That was amazing. So we heard about integrated capital, which is both grant capital and debt capital. And then we also learned, because Kataly is a spend down, you're able to make catalytic investments far and beyond what typically a foundation would be making, because you aren't prioritizing in perpetuity. You're prioritizing the highest and best use of the endowment itself. So thank you for that. Nancy, I want to come to you and just also ask the same questions. Take whichever one you want. What is power? What are the tools? And what does community do with these investments?
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, how do you hold these foundations accountable? You know, Lisa talked about this in terms of organizing your funders. And I don't think there are a lot of community organizations that necessarily think that way. And I really love that framing, because if you're doing that, you're taking the power. You don't have to wait to be given it. And so what is power? That was the first question. What is power? Power is the ability to get stuff done. And the indicator of power is whose stuff is getting done. And I think, thanks. And, well, you know, that's truth, right? You know, a lot of, and as Lisa said, the original title for this was Demystifying Foundations and Funders. There's a lot of mystery among funders, you know, so if you feel like I'm not really sure how to access these funders, that don't feel like you're the only one, because philanthropy is going through a revolution. And in some places it's a little slower, but in others it's faster. We want to move that forward because it's supporting social change that we need. And so I think that's what the community derives from that. And so it's looking at the funders, that it's doing the research to figure out which funders are in your sphere, whatever you're working on. And then, as you said, what are the tools? Well, philanthropy is one, and within philanthropy we've talked about grants that you don't have to pay back, and we've talked about what I call program-related investments, PRI, where you have to pay that back over a longer term probably, and at a very low rate or zero rate of interest. But there are other ways too. There's ways in participating in convenings with other community leaders, with funders, and bring them in to let them hear the story when you're not asking for money. Because when you figure out, when the funders figure out where the needs are, the only way it makes sense is when the community is voicing the need. If the funder's coming in saying, I've got $10 million or $100 million or $450 million for XYZ topic, that may or may not be hitting the mark. And every funder needs to spend the time, to invest the time, to talk with community leaders and to be in community with people in the community. Just like Eugene is a fantastic example of this. Absolutely. More funders need to be thinking along those lines. And I think there are a fair number across the country. In San Francisco, we've got some too, that are really thinking about how do we listen first and then act. And I think that is a way of transferring some of the power. And we need to work on more of those too. So I'll pause here.
No, thank you for that. So I think what I want to add to this conversation around tools is, so I'll say that I've been the executive director of the Hyams Foundation for about almost 3 years. January 2021 is when I started. And I joined very specifically to try to address the huge gaps in infrastructure that our Massachusetts-based social justice movement groups were encountering. So infrastructure is like, there's nothing, there's nothing like, this is very concrete. This is laying awake at night trying to figure out how I'm gonna make payroll, right? My computers are 15 years old and they were donated, so they were old when we got them 15 years ago. That's when I was in my second ED job, I inherited that situation. And I went to my funders and I said, hey, who's going to help me with this? We rely on community members come in. We have all sorts of needs for these computers. And they said, well, that's what we give you general operating for. So you kind of have to figure it out. Long story short, we went to local unions, and they literally passed the hat for us. That's how I got my computers paid for. That there's something seriously wrong with the fact that philanthropy did not take responsibility for the basic infrastructure that our movements need. If we can't get computers, how are we going to win? How are we going to run statewide campaigns? Anyway, so you all know what I'm talking about. So when I joined Hyams, I knew that this was the thing that we needed to do. We needed to do some funder organizing to change philanthropy's mind to see we have a responsibility to make sure that the leadership pipeline, the communications infrastructure, IT infrastructure, community organizing pathways from youth to adult-led organizations. All of this is not the domain of one single organization. This is an ecosystem-wide problem. And if there are deficits, philanthropy has a role in filling those deficits. So the intervention that I want to kind of name is that we, at the Hyams Foundation, we went to what we call movement anchors. So these were 10 grassroots organizations, Eugene is one of them, that not only organize their communities, but they also anchor local and statewide coalitions and are playing often invisible back-end support roles to many, many, many smaller groups that nobody gives them credit for, right? They're like the informal communications hub for 10 different organizations, and nobody's paying for that, right? So creating a situation where the movement anchors identify those needs, make them visible, and then create ecosystem-wide projects that philanthropy would pay for. So this is a long way of saying we resourced that entire project, from issue identification to creating these pilot projects to creating a participatory allocation fund, so that once we were successfully organizing funders to put money into these infrastructure projects, the movement themselves were the ones deciding where the money goes and what which projects would get would move from pilot status to more established institutions, right? So that entire process was led by movement groups, but the movement groups themselves did not have the capacity to, they didn't have the capacity to do that on their own. So as a foundation, we created the space for them to convene. We gave extra money so that they could hire staff to do the things that they would have been doing had they not been organizing these projects, et cetera. So all of this was in addition to whatever regular money they were already promised by the foundations. And it was our job as a funder to organize other funders to put extra money in. Don't take money that you are already going to give to them. Find new money and put money into infrastructure. That's another example of how foundations can use their existing capacity to support movement-identified needs. So what I want to do is, I would love for us to have a conversation really briefly. Nancy, Eastern Bank and Hyams were two of many, many, many different funders that followed community leaders' needs in East Boston when 36 buildings that would have been lost to the speculative market were reclaimed by community organizations, a CDC, City Life Vida Urbana. Full disclosure, I was the past ED way back in the day. But City Life Vida Urbana and East Boston Community Development Corporation reclaimed 113, I think, units in what we used to call ground zero for displacement in the city of Boston, reclaimed them, and they are now under community control and ownership. And we had, yeah, clap for that effort. It was huge. So could you talk about what was Eastern Bank's role in that project?
Yeah, it was a big project, and there are more in the offing. So we're looking forward, and if you hear about those, make sure that you're sharing that knowledge, because you know, the best part about that Blue Line portfolio is the governance. It's a local governance. The people who live there are responsible for the governance. And so Eastern's role in that was actually twofold. One, we're a bank. I don't usually talk about the bank side, but we're a bank and we do a lot of community development lending. So there was a development lending aspect of this from the bank side, and we ended up the lead lender on the project because of our commitment on the bank side to affordable housing. And the best part about this was that there was mostly 2 and 3 bedroom units, so it was really family oriented. While the bank was doing that, we were also learning from my friend Henry back here. Thank you again. And BII, which has been tremendous help to many, and especially to me. In using, so the way foundations work, most times they take their total assets and they take 5%, and that's what they donate for the year. That's their budget typically for the year. That leaves 95% sitting on the sidelines. Most of the time, as you heard this morning, that's invested in Wall Street. But we wanted to also invest that in our communities. So we took a portion of that, and as part of that, what we call program-related investment, PRI, took some of that 95% and invested it in addition to what we were doing on the bank side. So with a very small interest rate back, which is required, it's not so altruistic, let's face it. Foundations can't charge a lot of interest on that. But the point is, we're deploying the 90 parts of the 95% into our communities. And so we did that with East Boston, and hopefully we'll do that with others soon. And there are other ways to invest that money too. And so this, you know, to Lisa's earlier point, there are other ways to engage a funder. This is a clear one. What are you doing with the 95%? Are you using that to build community?
Nwamaka, so thank you for that, Nancy. So we've heard about ways that we can use the 5%, which is largely money that you don't have to pay back, right? Lots of different ways. We're beginning to hear about the 95%. So one way is by asking your local funder, hey, do you do program-related investments, which is a low or in some cases no interest loan from the endowment itself. So there are some funders who made their first PRI in the Blue Line East Boston Portfolio Project, and that was as a result of organizing from the community, going to funding partners and saying, you should do a PRI, because if you don't, we will lose these buildings and these families will be evicted. So that came from community organizing. And yeah, so that was super important. Nwamaka, I would love for you to talk about the ways that you use the 95%, both how you are investing the 95%, and yeah, just sort of add to this conversation, because I think not enough people talk about this.
Yeah, and I think we also moved a grant to the City Life portfolio as well. So y'all did a great job organizing from ocean to ocean on that one. But you know, in terms of like this breakdown of the 95% and the 5%, you know, we blur it at Kataly again because it's a fictitious amount, right? The 5% is what's mandated by IRS tax law, but you can move more than that. So we move upwards of 40 to 50 million a year in a mix of grants and investments, right? So because we do 0% interest loans, we are able to, and we do that through our donor advised funds. So I know there's critique and feedbacks of donor advised funds, as there should be. And for us as a foundation, it provides us with the flexibility that we need to move money quickly and to move it on the non-extractive terms that we're interested in as a foundation. So we don't call our assets an endowment, because we are not trying to retain and grow that core amount. We refer to it as our unrestricted reserve. And so our unrestricted reserve is where we're looking to do a mixed placement of investments in CDFIs, in MDIs, and really thinking through creatively those local municipality bonds. Like, we would be really excited to think about what could a water infrastructure bond look like for Jackson, given their water crisis, or for Flint, given their water crisis? And how could you actually invest in that community so the community could own their infrastructure? And so ownership for Kataly is a core element to our theory of change, in ownership as a transition point to stewardship, right? We're not trying to own in order to consume and to dominate. We're trying to ensure that community owns in order to have control, say an agency over the infrastructure that governs and manages their lives. So while we don't have this 95%, 5% split, we get to think creatively about how we want to manage our assets as we are moving it to spend out and really investing in community through those three program areas and through our integrated capital strategy. One thing I want to lift up on this piece around how else to organize other funders, I think in addition to this piece that you had lifted up around don't just engage them when it's time to ask for money, also in the day-to-day work, one of the things that we've been excited about that we get to do at Kataly is by providing a 0% interest loan, we're able to take what's called a subordinated position in a capital stack, right? So that helps to incentivize other funders and investors that are still kind of dipping their toes in the water, are not yet ready to invest in Black and Brown communities for all the racist reasons we understand. But if we can actually get them to come into the deal, they get to learn, they get to observe, and then they get to follow our non-extractive due diligence process, right? And so how do we leverage our assets to make the waters a bit more enticing for those people that are still a little bit skittish about this work? And then I think the other thing is, some of y'all know I come from a community organizing background. So when we have other investors that want to support our projects, but want to do a market rate return, or want the Restorative Economies Fund to guarantee their loan, I actually get to go and say, no, we're not going to guarantee your loan. We think that you need to share in the risk of being a part of this project. And in addition to not guarantee, we are asking you to also move a grant alongside to this community, right? Because they're investing the knowledge, the skill, and the while you're investing the capital into the project. So we also leverage our institutional and hierarchical power as a funder to then engage other funders and investors in our peer landscape to come in and try it on alongside with this.
So this is so thank you, both Nancy and Nwamaka. So we've heard about grant capital, we've heard about debt capital, now we're also hearing about using our power and privilege as investors to influence the terms that other investors are willing to put into these projects, right? So these are three really concrete examples that we wanted to offer to you as strategies as you are going out and doing your own organizing of your funders. And so in the few minutes that we have remaining, we want to open it up and just hear what reflections you have, what comments you have, what other strategies you want to bring into the room, because again, we want all of us to come out with more strategies to organize funders so that you can pursue your mission. And there is a mic in the back of the room that will come to you, I think. Yep. All right. Jessica has a hand up.
I mean, there were so many mic drop moments. Thank you so much, panel. Thank you. I'm really curious right now about, when we're talking about influencing our foundations, and I want to hear what you said, not as a foundation talking to a foundation, right? But somebody from the street. I mean, I don't mean street, but I mean just, but somebody who might be, you know, a grantee or a part of a community. That's different than sitting as a foundation talking to you. How do they influence you? What do they have to say to you for you to say, I need to get myself together?
I think that's a really good question. Thank you. You know, Eastern Bank Foundation's been around 29 years. And honestly, the first 25 years were the same year repeated 25 times. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we said, you know, we really need to dig in here and decide what we want to invest in. Who are we as Eastern Bank Foundation? That's when we took the word charitable out of our name. It's not about charity. And we did a lot of research talking to community leaders, people on the street, just listening to what they saw as the most compelling needs in their communities, because we're in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. And that influenced us a lot. And then looking at the research also, you know, Boston's one of the most philanthropic cities in the world. And yet most of that money goes to hospitals, colleges and universities, and arts and culture. At the time we did that research, only 4% of the philanthropy of one of the most philanthropic cities in the world was going to social justice and equity building projects and organizations focused on those things. So for us, listening to the communities and then seeing the dearth of resource, it was compelling for us to move in that direction. And I think that's when I say other organizations are starting to move in this direction. We need to push them. We need to encourage that migration so that people are listening to the communities they're looking to serve, because if it's like this, it can't work. It has to be in partnership.
Nwamaka, what do you say?
I mean, the truth is, y'all be telling me about myself all the time, but thank you. You know, the truth is, we're figuring out it has to be a conversation, and figuring out we need to create more spaces and opportunities for that conversation to take place. You know, a year or so ago, we had decided to do an evaluation, reaching out to our grantees and our borrowers, asking them for feedback on how we are going about our work, on what their experience was like in going through our due diligence process. And we take that feedback and iterate in how we do our work going forward. I think also as we move closer towards our spend out, have been trying to think through what are the forms that we create opportunities for folks to name and share what's coming up for them as we're moving through our spend out. And so this January was the first time we did our State of the Spend Out event and creating a space for open dialogue. What I have observed in this role is that the challenges and pushbacks are and should be there. And what we also fail to do with philanthropy is to really lift up the limitations of the possibility of this work, in that philanthropy, because we know a philanthropy inherently shouldn't exist, sometimes the push and pull to kind of create the more perfect philanthropy doesn't fully math. And so that's why we're really clear, well, we actually need to move our resources out into those spaces and vehicles that are governed by community, and then invest in their capacity to learn how to steward that over a period of time. But fortunately, because we have a team that comes out of doing this work on the ground, that has relationships with folks out in the community, people will DM, They will text, they will call you in all the ways, and when it's done with loving kindness, we really hear and receive that, and we do our best to respond to it.
I love that you said people will DM you, they will text you, they will call you in the middle of the night sometimes. If we are in relationship,
Definitely on the weekends.
definitely on the weekends, if we're in relationship with each other, then the mechanisms exist for folks to reach out to us. Yeah.
Can you coach us in responding to the question about risk? Whether it's risk, if I'm a financial advisor trying to talk to people about risk, whether it's people on, our folks on the ground trying to tell funders about risk. Can you just speak to, like, how do you respond to those conversations? Because it would be helpful, I think, for lots of us to hear.
Well, the first thing is asking, what risk? What risk are you trying to mitigate? Because often that is coming from a very racist thought. And so I just call them out when I hear that. Because what risk are you trying to mitigate?
Yeah, it's we call BS on that for sure. And I think I would invite us to think about, let's hold the line a little bit harder on what our communities deserve, in that when there is that pushback, we need to be able to actually name the risk, right? The risk is climate change. We see the Black and brown communities that are the forefront of being impacted by that. The risk is this community losing this historic building. The risk is children continuing to go hungry. And so I think as funders and investors, sometimes when we ask the question about risk, because we're only thinking about the financial risk, we're completely invisibilizing what it means to the community. So in our integrated capital questionnaire, we ask the question of, what is at risk to the community if we were not to fund this project, right? And that's how we then center everything that we underwrite, so that we're not prioritizing the returns back to us over the people and the planet. And so I would really invite us to be clear about visibilizing all the different risks inherent in a project, so that the financial piece is just one sliver, and that we also need to find the funders and investors that will share in taking on the social, the political, and the economic risks when we're looking at a project.
Yeah, I think often, just want to add on that, often people kind of devolve to the financial risk because that's the most quantifiable. It's the easiest one to talk about in terms of numbers, but it devalues all of the social risk of not doing it. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we're balancing that equation.
Yeah, and on the so this is being recorded, so I have to choose my words carefully. We are in conversation with other funders who, and we're asking them, how did you choose your investment advisor? How did you choose the person who is advising you on risk? And what we are trying to do is to be in community with other foundations that share this perspective, that the real risk is not investing in our communities. The real risk is using the 95% to uphold the very systems that we're using the 5% to undo, right? And so one thing that I am learning as a new foundation executive is that we need to create the demand to, there need to be more of us challenging this notion of risk being low financial returns, for example, or risk being investing in what is traditionally considered safe. And the more of us that are thinking about firing our investment advisors for new investment advisors that share our values, the more of us that are asking probing questions, how are you thinking about racial justice? What does that actually mean? Give me an example of who you would recommend that we invest and why. and let us know how this matches with our mission, with our values around racial justice. More of us need to be challenging, need to be asking these questions.
Yeah, and I think take it another step too. It's not just the financial advisor, it's who's running the money in each aspect of the portfolio. And are you going to BIPOC-led organizations or women-led organizations who are running the money? Because when you do the math, there is no additional risk there. So if we're pushing that, they've got better performance, or at least as good performance. So what I usually hear is, can't find them, they don't exist. How many times have we heard that lame line? So we have to find them, and we have to use them, and we got to push others to do the same.
That's absolutely right. I think we might have time for a few more questions. Yeah.
Awesome. Justin Merrick in Memphis, Tennessee. And my question is really around capital aggregation strategies. So right now we have a lot of funders that are investing in the area, like Kresge, Blue Meridian, RWJ. And there's some pots and funds that are being created, $50 million, $100 million, right, where they're looking to be able to match. This also means that it is a precursor to the displacement that we will, right, also see in the communities, because there's investment happening around development. The challenge that that we're in right now is, like, one, how do we spark this conversation more around like equitable development? And I think my question is, to your point that you were just saying around value system, right, and how we would love to see investment around equity promoting value systems. One, do you have a story? Do you all have a list of folks? Because what we've been doing is we've been looking at the spectrum of funders within the market and kind of assessing like where that value system is to kind of rank philanthropy as an internal like thing. So my question is, what we need, right, are capital, seeds that we can plant to say, hey, these are funds that we would love to be able to match in this particular, as a part of this capital aggregation strategy. Have you all ever done something like that where you invest in another city as a way of matching to build that? That's the first question. And then my second question is, have you had conversations around how you grow your pots currently of money for that type of strategy to support matching foundations that might be willing to move a little bit more, right, from moderate to progressive in terms of some of their practices?
I'm going to be honest, I always get challenged by the match grant approach because it's been coming up a bit in the Bay Area as well, and I think philanthropy just needs to move that money, right? And so what can get tricky is I've seen so many organizations get stressed out about, if we don't meet this match by such and such deadline, we're gonna lose out, and that feels wrong to me. But I understand it as a tool and as a thing that happens out in our field, and so for us, we will support or be a part of a match as it pertains to an ongoing and existing relationship with an organization we're already in touch with. So since you named Blue Meridian on camera, right? Blue Meridian is also doing some match work out in Oakland. Black Cultural Zone is an organization that we've been in relationship with, and we have decided to honor our ongoing commitment, so therefore it can be matched. We've been fortunate enough to be invited into, mentioning Memphis, having supported some projects in that area, and then that has invited other funders to come in. And so it is a helpful way of aggregating and lifting up capital. However, I do not want us to miss the importance of the moral obligation that philanthropy has to actually just resource those projects, because what they're doing with the match, right, is trying to generate their own social capital to say that they did this thing for the community. And so I have conflicted feelings about it, but to your second question about would we ever grow our pot of funds to do that? No, because we are a spend out. However, if there was a community governed loan fund in Memphis, we would, move an integrated capital investment into that fund. And then hopefully whatever investments or returns get generated through non-extractive ways in the community could also contribute back to that match. So for me, ensuring that we are not continuing to center ourselves as the philanthropic institution in that match engagement in that local community, but rather being able to resource the economic power of the community to have standing on their own.
Yeah, and I would just say from a local context, we put a lot of energy into funder organizing, but really that's looking for mission-aligned foundations in the state and moving away from extractive strategies like that and moving toward pooling resources in support of movement-identified priorities. And so for smaller foundations like Hyams, I would say it's, leverage the capital that you can, even if it's not a lot, and then also invest in doing the kind of funder organizing that moves away from those kinds of strategies.
As organizations who are kind of progressive in the social impact mindset as far as how you're doing your work, have you seen any social impact, like collective impact reporting that actually does accountability to the communities that you're serving as a model for instance, I'm in Texas, right? Like, and so we are trying to work with foundations to kind of prop up this progressive mindset, but being able to say, okay, this is what reporting looks like for collective impact to these communities that we're serving, so that we are actually, the promises that we're making, we're actually reporting back to those same communities and letting them hold us accountable for the promises that we made at that.
We are, we're kind of in the middle of a shift at our foundation in terms of thinking about reporting. And so the shift right now is it's our job to report back to the community about the extent to which we are being good partners to them. And for us, that looks like the movement infrastructure work that we started. Is that making any difference to anybody, or is it just a lot of words and talk, right? So we did an internal evaluation, which was really a lot of conversations with stakeholders in the movement and some kind of allied funders. And then for the second year, and now in the third year, we have engaged an external evaluator, basically having more of those conversations with more people. And all of this is to say, we are putting the onus on impact on us. Really, the question is, to what extent can philanthropy shift the balance of power? What does it take to do that well? And where are we falling short? What internal and external changes do we need to make at the staff and the board and governance level in order to be better partners to the movement? So that's an example. We're literally right in the middle of that.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think in terms of the reporting, it's all over the map. Some foundations don't report anything other than the list of their grants. Others try and make bold claims of attribution, of making, huge change when they were a piece of that change, but not the total. So I think it's really right now case by case, and we as funders need to have some greater consistency in what are we tracking there, and then making sure we're tracking it across. But for now, it's kind of the Wild West on reporting.
Teacher? Hey.
Thank you. I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask this. I have a two-part, right? Rhode Island. We don't have progressive funders in this, right? The most progressive conversation we're having is racial equity and trust-based philanthropy. So, largest funder money, one of the funders have given out in some time, multi-year. First, they're giving multi-year funding for the first time. They used a racial equity conversation to bring us all in. But the folks who didn't get funded was a crew of us who were led by women of color, right? And so I organized all of us to hold an accountability session. And my question to them was, you're funding racial equity, yet you're funding the same white institutions to get more people of color inside of them, but you're not investing in those of us. We may be smaller, but we are led by women of color and our membership of people of color. I have a problem with the framework. No, this is trust-based philanthropy. You don't have to do all these things. Yeah, but you don't even ask the right questions to understand the depth of our work, right? And I had to do this with 2 different funders. I had to walk them through all of the work that I do, because your narrow focus around policy, because you think policy is the answer to everything, you have no sense or understanding of what it means to do alternative solution work, right? And I had to say, if you're not gonna fund me, just do it, just let me know. But I'm not telling you a policy I'm gonna work on. My community has not named that as the strategy at this point. And I said, here's what we do, how we do it. This is how many members of our community are engaged, and either you're with us or you're not. I said, I can't, because it doesn't align with what you want to have done, your pillars, right? So this conversation around racial equity and this trust-based philanthropy as a thing is fucking us up. And I don't know how to think about what are the other ways I can cut through this to have a conversation with funders so they understand the implications of their approach to it. Because I was like, it's not justice, y'all. I need justice. Equity is great, but it only gets us so far. You know, what about the justice? So my question to you all is, y'all, way over here in Rhode Island, I always say to people, let's just go and learn. We're gonna go to Boston, we're gonna go here, because I need for people to understand that the world actually doesn't operate like this. There's other things happening. But I wanna organize funders there to understand, because we got a lot of old white money there, right? A lot of family foundations. Our community foundation is run like a corporation. So I'm trying to think about what are our strategies for organizing people that ain't gonna take me off the track of what I'm supposed to be doing every damn day.
So what I want to say to you very specifically is that we're part of the Solidaire Network, which is radical donors nationally, and we are organizing a Northeast hub, which includes Rhode Island, of progressive and radical funders to be able to move money outside of Boston, the center, and actually redistribute throughout the Northeast region. So we should talk about that. And I was given the word that our time is up. So what I would love for us to do is to just hear parting words of wisdom, starting with you, Nancy, and then ending with you, Nwamaka, and then we'll close.
We got a side moderator over here in the audience.
I love it. We're yeah. So the answer. So one very specific answer is that we are organizing funders in the Northeast region. I hear you. I hear you. So my co-moderator has said that Nancy and Nwamaka must also answer this question in their parting words, and I concur. I concur. That's right, Nancy.
So the way I would answer that, because you're asking how do I get them to see the light, right? And I've had conversations with other funders trying to get them to see the light. So I have a sliver of the frustration that you have, because they're just looking at it from their own lens, and it's an opaque lens. They can't see. And it's very frustrating. What I have done is I ask them a lot of questions, and maybe that works from a funder perspective. I don't know if it would work from yours, but I'm offering it as a suggestion. That, you know, this is what you want to fund. How did you decide that? What information did you have? Who else do you know is doing that? How do you see that affecting our communities? Which communities are you trying to affect? And just lead them through those questions in a way that gets them, hopefully, to see. Some of them you'll get. Not all of them. But the more we get, the better off we'll all be.
Yeah, I think, as you're talking, Nancy, what came up for me was reminding me of my days back when I did political organizing. We would have a candidate forum. Like, I would be really curious to have a funder forum where you're like, these are the questions, right? How are you answering it? And here's the scorecard that we are giving you from a racial equity perspective, right? And I think that the community gets to come together and define trust-based philanthropy. I think that there's a way that we throw out trust-based philanthropy as a way of having to skirt accountability. Trust is actually something that is built over time and maintained through our actions, right? Our actions aligning with our words. And so, when a funder is coming saying we're doing trust-based philanthropy, well, what is the demonstrated track record that you have that indicates that I should have trust and faith in you? So there's that piece. The last thing that comes up for me is I would be very curious about what an organized effort of this community of women of color you mentioned, what an organized effort where you actually are able to put together your platform of work and your demands, right? For the community to actually be the ones that get to define what racial justice funding looks like in your community, as opposed to having that dictated by the funders. And then, lastly, I'm down to go anywhere. I'm here for a good time, but a short time with Kataly. And so if it means that it is helpful to have funders that understand your vision to actually go and be a part of a conversation where we can both hold sympathy for the funder because we actually understand like all the rigmarole of philanthropy, and still show them, well, these are actually the bright spots and the places where we get to do things differently, then I think we could have that conversation. And if it then means that, we're going to move some money alongside you, also this community can have a little bit more, and so that you can see what's possible, then let's take a chance on that. For my closing words, I don't know. Thank y'all. Y'all are great. I hope you all talk to each other because I'm seeing so many brilliant faces out in the room, and it's just exciting to be at a place in our movement where Boston Ujima and Nia can bring us together for Black possibilities. So thank you so much to Nia and the Ujima team.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Nwamaka, for your words of wisdom. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this conversation. Have a wonderful rest of your conference.